On a quiet February morning in 2016, employees arrived at the Central Bank of Bangladesh, expecting another ordinary day. Nothing seemed unusual. The lights were on, the servers were running, the security systems showed no alarms. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. But behind those walls, one of the largest financial crimes in modern history had already happened. Without smashing a single window, without threatening a single employee, without anyone noticing. Somewhere, thousands of miles away, a group of hackers had just stolen $81 million from one of the world's most secure financial institutions. And the most shocking part? They never physically entered the bank. This wasn't a Hollywood movie. Every cross-border transaction passed through an interconnected digital network operating around the clock. Few people ever thought about it, because when everything works perfectly, no one notices. Until one day, everything changes. At the center of this story was the Bangladesh Bank, the country's central bank. Unlike ordinary commercial banks, a central bank doesn't simply manage customer accounts. It safeguards national reserves, maintains financial stability, and manages enormous sums of money belonging to an entire nation. Part of those reserves were held in an account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, one of the world's most important financial institutions. This account contained hundreds of millions of dollars, money intended to support the country's economy, protected by sophisticated international banking systems. On paper, it appeared untouchable. Yet months before anyone realized something was wrong, someone had already found a way inside. Not through explosives, not through armed robbery, but through patience, planning, and code. The attackers didn't rush. They didn't need to. Instead, investigators believe they spent weeks, and likely months, carefully studying how the bank operated, learning employee routines, understanding internal systems, searching for the smallest weakness. Because in cybersecurity, the strongest vault in the world means nothing if someone quietly steals the key. That simple idea became the foundation of one of history's most sophisticated cyber attacks. The hackers weren't interested in destroying computers. They weren't trying to shut down the bank. Their goal was far more dangerous: to remain completely invisible. And when the time finally came, to convince the global financial system that fake payment instructions were completely real. By the time the first warning signs appeared, the money had already begun moving. Months before the world heard about the theft, the attack had already begun. Investigators later concluded that the hackers didn't simply wake up one day and steal millions. They prepared, patiently, silently. Their first objective wasn't money, it was access. Cybersecurity experts believe the attackers initially gained a foothold inside the bank's network through a carefully crafted phishing campaign, emails designed to appear completely legitimate. A single click could quietly install malicious software, giving the attackers a way into the internal systems. From there, the real operation started. Instead of moving quickly, they stayed hidden. Day after day, week after week, the malicious software quietly observed employee activity. It watched computers start each morning. It monitored login routines. It learned which systems handled international payments. Every piece of information helped the attackers understand exactly how the bank worked. The malware was designed to avoid attention. It consumed very little system power. It generated almost no obvious warning signs. To employees, everything looked normal. Computers functioned, transactions continued, daily operations carried on without interruption. But behind the scenes, someone else was watching. The attackers were especially interested in one critical system: the software used to communicate with the global SWIFT network. SWIFT is not a bank. It is a secure messaging network that financial institutions use to send payment instructions around the world. Banks trust those authenticated messages because they come through established procedures. The attackers understood something incredibly important. If they could send fraudulent payment instructions that looked genuine, other banks might process them as legitimate. They didn't need to break the world's banking system. They only needed to persuade it. That required precision. The hackers studied how authorized payment requests were created, how they were approved, when they were sent, and what they looked like. They weren't guessing. They were learning. Investigators later found evidence suggesting the malware could also interfere with local records, making it harder for employees to immediately spot suspicious activity. That delay mattered. Every extra minute gave the attackers more time. Then, they waited. Not for days, for the perfect moment. In early February 2016, that opportunity arrived. As the working week came to an end, staffing levels were lower, and response times would likely be slower. The attackers were ready. What happened next would become one of the most audacious cyber-enabled financial thefts ever recorded. Within a short period, a series of payment messages were sent from the Bangladesh Bank's systems, requesting transfers from its account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. On the surface, the messages appeared authentic. They followed expected formats. They carried the correct technical details. To automated systems, they looked like ordinary banking instructions. But they weren't. They had been created by criminals. The requests totaled nearly $1 billion. It was an astonishing amount. If every transfer had succeeded, the consequences would have been far greater than anyone initially imagined. And for
one after another, the payment instructions entered the global banking system. Each message appeared to come from an authorized source. To computers processing millions of transactions every day, there was nothing obviously unusual. The requests traveled through the international financial network toward the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where Bangladesh Bank held part of its foreign currency reserves. For a brief moment, the attackers' plan seemed to be working. Several payment requests were processed. Funds began moving out of the account. Millions of dollars were suddenly traveling across the world. Yet inside Bangladesh Bank, almost no one knew what was happening. The attackers had anticipated one critical problem. Sooner or later, employees would review the outgoing transactions. If they noticed the transfers quickly, the operation could collapse. Investigators later reported that the malware interfered with local monitoring systems, making it harder for staff to immediately spot the fraudulent payment activity. That delay gave the attackers something incredibly valuable: time. Meanwhile, the payment requests reached the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Although several transfers were initially processed, not everything went according to the attackers' plan. Some requests began attracting attention. Certain details appeared unusual. Additional checks were triggered. Those checks would prove to be one of the biggest turning points in the entire case. Out of dozens of payment requests, many were stopped before completion. But not all. According to official reports, transfers worth $81 million were successfully sent onward. The money moved through international financial channels toward accounts in the Philippines. By the time questions began to emerge, the funds were already beyond the first stage of the banking system. Inside Bangladesh Bank, the weekend delayed the normal pace of operations. When employees returned and started reviewing records, something felt wrong. Balances didn't match expectations. Transaction records raised questions. Confusion spread quickly through the offices. At first, some staff believed it might be a technical error, a software malfunction, a reporting problem. But as investigators looked deeper, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a computer glitch. It wasn't an accounting mistake. Someone had sent real payment instructions, and real money had left the country's reserve account. An emergency response began immediately. Officials contacted the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. International financial institutions were alerted. Cybersecurity experts were called in. Every minute now mattered. Investigators rushed to determine exactly what had happened, where the money had gone, and whether more fraudulent transfers were still moving through the system. The answers revealed something deeply unsettling. This had not been a random attack. It had been carefully planned, patiently executed, and designed to exploit trust rather than brute force. Officials contacted the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. International financial institutions were alerted. Cybersecurity experts were called in. Every minute now mattered. Investigators rushed to determine exactly what had happened, where the money had gone, and whether more fraudulent transfers were still moving through the system. The answers revealed something deeply unsettling. This had not been a random attack. It had been carefully planned, patiently executed, and designed to exploit trust rather than brute force. The world's banking system had not been broken by force. It had been manipulated into following instructions it believed were legitimate. That realization changed everything. Because if one central bank could be deceived, could it happen somewhere else? Could another financial institution be next? Those questions would soon trigger one of the largest international cybercrime investigations ever launched, and the search for the people behind the attack was only just beginning. The moment investigators confirmed that real money had disappeared, the race began. Not to catch the hackers first, but to stop the money before it vanished forever. In cybercrime, stealing the money is only half the operation. Keeping it is often even harder. Authorities quickly traced the successful transfers to bank accounts in the Philippines. That discovery answered one question, but created many more. Who controlled those accounts? Who opened them? And where would the money go next? Every passing hour made recovery more difficult. Once stolen funds move through multiple financial institutions, following them becomes increasingly complicated, especially when criminals attempt to split the money into smaller amounts or move it through different businesses. Investigators from multiple countries began working together. Financial intelligence units, law enforcement agencies, cybersecurity specialists, central banks. Everyone was trying to reconstruct the same puzzle. Every bank transfer, every account, every digital message could contain another clue.
As investigators followed the trail, they discovered that a significant portion of the stolen money had been withdrawn and moved through the Philippine financial system. According to publicly reported investigations, some of the funds eventually passed through casino operators, where tracking money became even more difficult under the regulations in place at that time. With every new transfer, the trail became colder.
Después. Meanwhile, cybersecurity teams focused on another mystery. How had the attackers fooled one of the world's most trusted banking systems? Digital forensic experts carefully examined the infected computers inside Bangladesh Bank. Every hard drive, every server, every network log, every hidden file. They searched for even the smallest piece of evidence. What they found confirmed their suspicions. The attack had not been random. The malware had been specifically designed for its target. It quietly monitored activity. It understood banking procedures, and it attempted to reduce the chances of immediate detection. Investigators also reconstructed the timeline of the attack. Months of preparation, weeks of observation, then a carefully timed execution. The criminals had shown remarkable patience. They weren't relying on luck. They were relying on planning. As more details became public, cybersecurity experts around the world paid close attention. Because this attack wasn't just about one bank. It exposed a much larger problem.
Modern financial systems are built on trust. Banks trust authenticated payment messages. Employees trust their internal systems. Institutions trust that security software will detect suspicious activity. But when attackers gain access to trusted systems, that trust itself can become the vulnerability. The Bangladesh Bank heist became a global wake-up call. Banks everywhere began reviewing their own cybersecurity defenses. Security procedures were strengthened, monitoring systems improved. Authentication processes became more rigorous, because one question now echoed throughout the financial world. And that mystery would continue to shape cybersecurity discussions for years.